Hello, and welcome back to another weekly podcast here at Bio Biz. If you're wondering about the sound quality and all that, it's because our studio is under renovations, and unfortunately, all that we've been left with is a MacBook and a desk.
And a dirty radiator.
And a dirty radiator, but that's fine. My guest this week, botanist George Downs, and agricultural expert Jasmine Pickering, here to discuss one of the biggest issues facing humanity, overpopulation, and how we can ever hope to feed such a growing population. We'll start off with some facts and some figures. According to the 2015 United Nations World Populations Prospect Report, the world's population is currently growing at a rate of 1.1% each year, but this is down from 1.5 in 1995 and 1.2 in 2005. The current average population growth is 83 million per year. So, as we heard, the population increase appears to be slowing down, but is it slowing fast enough? Let's look at some more projections, and we'll put a graph up here so that you can see. The median projections for population increasing into the 22nd century, including the world population reaching 9.7 billion by 2050, increasing to a worrying 11.2 billion by 2100. So, as an agricultural expert, what are your thoughts on this?
Ideally, we need more land in underdeveloped countries for agriculture. However, the Global Agro-Ecological Zone Study shows that the ample land that is available is in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, is needed for the growing population and to accommodate these people. Already, the global impact of farming in the environment is huge, and the satellite images show that 40% of the Earth's land is now being used for agriculture.
It's quite a lot.
A lot. Therefore, simply finding more land to grow crops to meet the demands of the rising population is not viable, and other methods to do so need to be put into practice, such as introducing policies to support and develop agriculture in undeveloped countries.
Well, that's interesting. It's interesting that the study you brought up focuses on Africa as their point of agricultural expansion. When if I just look at the 2015 UN Prospects Report again, estimates say that by 2050, the bulk of the world's population growth will take place in Africa. Of the additional 2.4 billion people estimated to come into the world between 2015 and 2050, 1.3 will be added to Africa, making the total percentage of the population 25%.
25%.
So, with that in mind, the space being needed for homes and such, Georgia, as a botanist, what can we do?
So I agree with you both that there will be no further space for agricultural land. That's why I think the best way to go about this is through transgenic crops. For example, Argentina increased from a medium rate of development to a very high rate of development from 1990 to 2013. Now that's increased 2 whole classes of development in just 23 years. During this time, Argentina was the only developing country with a significant amount of transgenic crops. That's 15% of all transgenic crops planted at the time. So Argentina saw advances in agriculture without losing space for urbanisation. So why can't other countries do this?
So what about the genetically modified organisms that are already available?
Well, people have been altering the genomes of plants and animals to portray desired traits for many years. Sweet corn and seedless grapes are examples of genetically modified organisms that are widely accepted today, but a prime example is golden rice. So by incorporating just 2 genes into the plant's genomes, the pathway to produce vitamin A can be switched back on, and the vitamin A accumulates in the rice grain. This vitamin A-rich grain can prevent malnutrition and decrease mortality.
Very interesting.
It is. And if we funnel our resources into genetically modified crops to produce more yield and nutritional value, it can be a huge step in feeding the population.
Well, give us some examples of how we could increase the yield through genetic modification.
So, directly incorporating genes into the plant's genomes that can increase its photosynthetic ability. For example, inserting genes that code for a form of rubisco that has a higher affinity for CO2 will reduce the amount of energy that is lost to photorespiration.
But I understand there are some issues with gaining the same results that you would in a controlled environment than you would in the field.
Yeah, there are indeed. Experiments in the lab rarely exhibit the same conditions in the field. There's many external factors that affect results in the field, but we are slowly overcoming these problems. In fact, a joint research project between the University of Essex, Lancaster and Rothamsted Research is waiting for approval of UK field trials for genetically modified wheat, which which they believe will increase the crop yield by 40%.
In my opinion, further genetic modification of plants won't really be widely accepted. That's because there's too many ethical issues surrounding the subject. I believe crops that are genetically modified will reach a plateau and won't be able to grow anymore, so will reach a maximum potential growth.
Fair point.
Why don't you tell us more about these ethical issues surrounding transgenic crops?
Well, first of all, why should we change the natural environment to suit us when we should be the ones changing instead? People want to eat natural food that hasn't been tampered with, and this is obvious when we see a number of restaurants that have removed genetically modified organisms from their menus, such as Pizza Hut.
I heard Chipotle did as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then what other approaches do you suggest?
I believe we need to increase small-scale farming in poorer countries so communities can become self-sufficient, and enforce more rural agriculture extension schemes. These will provide farmers with credit, seeds, fertilisation and advice for poorer farmers to enable them to produce bigger yields and more successful yields. We can also look into introducing a private-public partnership to allow for the funding of small-scale farming. And finally, the most obvious way to solve this issue overall is by changing human behaviour.
Well, that being the most difficult, obviously.
Yeah, of course it is, but it is vital as well. Only 55% of the world's crop calories feed people directly. The rest are fed to livestock, so if rich countries could stop eating so many animal products, we'd have enough food to feed everyone else, really. And also, an estimated 25% of the world's food calorie and up to 50% of the total food weight are lost or wasted before they can even be consumed. In richer countries, most of the waste occurs in the homes, supermarkets, restaurants. So reducing food waste would also be significantly beneficial.
I see. Well, I mean, we've discussed plenty of solutions to population growth, and I think it's only fair to mention that there are opposing theories to this. Mm-hmm. Some say that population growth isn't going to increase, some say it will come to an end. So if we look at one, that's the demographic transition theory, first proposed by an American demographer. I think his name was Warren Thompson back in 1929. It's a 4-step process that we saw here in Britain following the Industrial Revolution. It explains, firstly, many deaths and many births in a country due to poor living conditions and medical practices. Second, improved living conditions, following stuff like the Industrial Revolution, stuff like that, lead to fewer deaths, which means there's an explosion in the population because there's too many births to counteract the deaths, obviously. But then next, fewer births due to fewer deaths leads to a plateau in the rise in population. And finally, an equilibrium is reached and population rise comes to an end.
Interesting theory.
Go.
So you're saying population increase is expected to plateau before it ever becomes a problem?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
That is a nice thought, but we do need to prepare for the worst.
Yeah, and even if population increase is expected to plateau, it's still going to increase and we still need to work on sorting out the world hunger that we have today.
That's true, yeah. Well, that's a good enough place to wrap it up as any. What will happen if our population exceeds our apparent 10 billion limit? Will we have mass migrations? Will we have slums in megacities across the world where disease runs rampant? We don't know. You tell us. What's your opinion?